Good morning and welcome to today's webinar discussing how direct mail is coming back to the future. I'm Alyssa Prettyman, Creative and Account Director with Scratch Marketing and Media, and I will be your host for today's event. I want to take a few minutes to go over some of the logistics of today's webinar. First off, the formal presentation will run about 30 to 35 minutes. Afterwards, we'll have some time for Q&A, so if you have questions, please use the Q&A tool in the On24 webinar platform, and we'll try to cover those as best possible. If we are unable to get your question during the Q&A session, we will follow up with you separately post-webinar. Let's review some of the webinar functionality. We will have the presentation located within the folder widget at the bottom, along with a few links to other resources. There is also an email widget at the bottom where you can send an email and invite a colleague if you'd like. This webinar is being recorded and will be available about 2 hours after the webinar has ended. So if you would like a copy, if you need to bow out early, or if you would like to send to a colleague who couldn't make it, it will be on demand following the registration for access at any time. Now let's take a second here and introduce today's speakers. We have a terrific panel with us today discussing Back to the Future with direct mail. We have David Raab, who is the principal of Raab Associates, Inc., and is responsible for the research and analysis of today's webinar. Principal David M. Raab has more than 30 years' experience as a marketer, consultant, author, and analyst. He specializes in helping marketers select the best technologies and service vendors. David has consulted with major firms in financial services, retail, communications, and other industries. He has written hundreds of articles on marketing issues and addressed audience around the world on marketing technology. David is the author of the B2B Marketing Automation Vendor Selection Toolkit and the Marketing Performance Measurement Toolkit published by Racom Communications. We also have Paul Mandeville from QuickPivot with us today. Paul Mandeville is QuickPivot's Chief Product Officer and leads the company's efforts in product strategy, innovation, and design. His work to date resulted in 2 QuickPivot patent filings, a 2015 Stevie Silver and People's Choice Award, and a 2014 MyTex Award for Best Innovation in Marketing Automation Technology. Prior to joining QuickPivot, Paul served as the Chief Operating Officer and was part of the founding management team at Conversion, a cross-channel marketing technology company located outside of Boston. Under his leadership, Conversion notched a spot in Inc. magazine's 2011 list of fastest-growing privately held companies. Paul is also an investor to the Slater Technology Fund, a business incubator group that places seed funding at innovative startups in his home state of Rhode Island. So without further ado, let me introduce our primary speaker for the event, David Raab. David, take it away.
Thank you, and thank you for joining us. Glad to be here this morning. As was just stated, I've been doing this for considerably more than 30 years, in fact. So when we talk about direct mail and going back to the future, it wasn't the future. When I started in the industry, direct mail was what we did. And there was this thing called TV. I'm not that old, but this whole, what do they call it, digital marketing, that didn't even exist yet. So it's pretty entertaining today to hear people saying, direct mail, that's so old-fashioned. Does anybody even do direct mail? You know, surely it's dead and everything is all digital. Well, if you look at the numbers, it turns out not to really be the case. There is, in fact, still more spent on direct mail than on digital display advertising or on search advertising, although if you add the two together, it's higher now. But direct mail is a very live and vibrant channel, and there's pretty good reason for that. At the end of the day, direct mail still has an impact that digital doesn't have. So, and, we talk about clutter. I think everybody today feels totally overwhelmed by the amount of advertising, and there's this number that floats around the industry of 5,000 ads a day, which nobody actually knows quite where that came from. It's one of those urban myth numbers. When somebody took a close look, a company called Media Dynamics, really took a close look at this stuff, they actually found that the number of ads that people were noticing hadn't really increased all that much despite all the change. People are spending a lot more time with media. That's the chart over there on the left where the number of media minutes gets much higher. compared with several years back. But the exposures, and exposures defined in this case, kind of, again, things that they actually are going to sort of be able to see as opposed to just things that are sort of flashing in front of them. And then things noted actually haven't grown much at all. Now, you could debate this. We actually did some other back-of-the-envelope calculations kind of trying to verify these numbers, and in fact came up with some similar things, but the thing that we realized is that there are a lot more ads out there. Whether you see them, whether you pay attention to them, that's really the key. And that really is the essence of direct mail, because direct mail does grab your attention in a way that a little digital ad flashing by, or a little thing in your Facebook page or whatever, scooshing by, those are really easy to ignore. A piece of direct mail is something physical in your hand, and this is not just, old codger guy whining about the good old days. There's actual scientific proof, so it must be true because somebody did a study showing just really how impactful direct mail is. And this is the study actually was done in the UK, but people aren't that different over there. And they asked people, as a result of receiving direct mail, what do you do? Well, 43% said they downloaded something as a result of direct mail. 92% had done some kind of online activity. 82% had been influenced by direct mail. 87% to make online purchases. 54% engage in social media. 86% connect with the business. So there's a lot of specific actions that direct mail drives people to do. And again, it's no mystery. It's because direct mail is this physical, tangible thing. Even if you pick it up and just glance at it before you toss it into the trash, and we hope you don't do that, you're at least going to get more exposure than you get to most of the online advertising you see. So, and just to reinforce that, most people don't just toss it into the trash. In this study, the same study we're looking at here, they found that advertising mail is retained on average 17 days. And, I look around my office, and there's little piles of advertisements that I've set aside that maybe I'll look at, maybe I won't, but I'll tell you, at least there's a chance I'm going to look at them. If they were a banner ad or even an email that I would have clicked on and eliminated immediately, for sure I never would have looked at them again. So there is definitely some substantial sort of staying power and marketing power that you get from direct mail today, and especially because while all those other channels are more and more and more media spending, actually direct mail volumes are about stable, going down a little. So you actually have less competition for the user's attention in direct mail than you did have in other channels. So the competition in the other channels is actually getting greater for your attention. In direct mail, competition is about the same, maybe even going down a bit. So direct mail is certainly something that belongs in your mix, in my mix, in everybody's marketing mix. So does that mean just, everything's all great in direct mail land and we can stop? No, it doesn't mean that at all. Direct mail isn't for everybody. It's not for everything. Direct mail, it works really well. It's great for breaking through the clutter, as we just talked about. It's great if you want to present more detailed information because you have, in the long form, you actually can send them a package. It's got a letter and brochures and all kinds of good stuff with all kinds of good information. It's great if you want to physically deliver a sample. Obviously something that you can't do unless you're going to physically send them a piece of mail. In many ways, personalization is easier in direct mail, certainly today, than it used to be. Again, we won't go back to when I started. We weren't quite, writing with quill pens, but the early personalization technologies with direct mail were pre-Rube Goldberg-ish. Now it's certainly gotten much easier. And we have vastly better data today than we used to, so that's one of the reasons that we can do the personalization more easily, is we have a lot better data as well as a lot better techniques. Now, again, doesn't mean it's right for everything. If you're going to do mass media, if you just want to get a brand name out there, TV still works great. Online display works great. But, if you have something where you have a targeted message, where you have a relatively well-identified audience of people who are kind of worth spending some money on, because direct mail is certainly more expensive on a cost per message basis than digital advertising or TV or even other kinds of print. There are situations, and it's, again, an important, significant proportion of situations where you're going to have a marketing goal that direct mail really is going to be the best way to meet. So let's talk a little more then about the obstacles, because I'm not saying it's easy. It works, but why is it hard? Well, we want to do that targeting. That's, again, the whole point of direct mail is we have this opportunity to send these really detailed targeted messages that we are really hard to do in media like, TV or even most print ads or most display ads where you don't know exactly who you're talking to. In direct mail, you couldn't send it if you didn't have a name and address. And once you have a name and address, you can have a lot more information about people. But that doesn't mean that just because you could have that information, you do have that information. There's tons and tons of data on these issues that boil down to whether people really have, in fact, gathered all the information about their customers and their prospects to put it together so they can leverage it appropriately, because direct mail really wants to be part of a larger marketing campaign. You really shouldn't use direct mail by itself. In many cases, you want to use it in combination with other messages. So if you want to use it in combination with those other messages, well, that means you have to pull all the data together so that you can, first of all, build a complete customer profile. And secondly, then, send consistent messages to the person across the different channels. So when we asked people, actually somebody else, eConsultancy in this case, asked people, how integrated their touch points were, they said that, 5% or so really do have great integration. And seamless integration of channels allows exploitation of opportunities. That's that 5% there. Interestingly, you see the numbers haven't changed much. 2011 is the light gray thing, and the 2015 is the current data, or the dark box is the current 2015 data. And about 5% of people really do it well. Most people still have silos, or they kind of understand the customer journey, but they don't really coordinate across the touch point, or they coordinate sort of at the channel, but they don't really coordinate at the individual customer level. So there's a lot of people who have not really built that perfect, all-seeing, all-channel database, and then not only built the database but executed against it. So how do we do that? Why are there problems? Well, when eConsultancy looked at why it was hard, they found that data, integrated data, was the biggest obstacle, kind of by far. Actually, not an obstacle in this case, the requirement. You can't do integrated marketing without integrated data. This is not exactly rocket science here. Obviously, you cannot do integrated marketing without integrated data, but remember, take that in connection with the fact that so people actually have integrated data, that it's a big issue, but it's not just data, it's also people and skills there, and systems and company culture, and all the other issues as well. There are a lot of things that you have to do right in order to make any kind of integrated marketing work. This isn't unique to direct mail, but because direct mail is so driven by targeting, it's particularly important to get these things right to make your direct mail work effectively. So let's now talk about what it means to get it right. What's it take? Well, you can think of it in terms of really 4 sort of key skills or key capabilities you're going to need to do, again, any kind of integrated marketing right, and certainly to do effective targeted direct mail right. Integrated data, integrated campaigns, multi-channel delivery. We're going to talk about each of these in turn now. So let's start with data. We talked about how important, of course, it is to get that integrated data. And one thing to bear in mind is that the data that you need for direct mail, the data that you need for digital marketing are kind of different. For direct mail, you need a name and address, and whatever else you know about the customer. For digital marketing, if you want to address them directly, you might need a device ID or a cookie or some sort of an email address or a social media handle or an account number, a whole bunch of things that you might use to connect to people digitally, and the challenge is both collecting them and connecting them so that you know that this email address and that social media thing and that mailing address really are, and that device are really all the same person, so I can, again, send those consistent coordinated messages across channel. So that's just a big challenge in itself. It's just assembling the data. When it comes to postal addresses, deliverability is a big issue. Email addresses as well, of course. Lots of people, raise your hand out there if you've ever given a false email address. I see a lot of hands. We all have, right? Just look right at your cell phone there. The camera is on. So deliverability is even more challenging in some ways for digital addresses than for postal addresses. Postal addresses, the post office can give you a big list. You can check, this really is a valid address. Often you can figure out even if that person still lives there or not. So it's a different set of capabilities that you need to know how to do to verify those physical addresses versus the digital addresses. But it's in some ways actually easier. You need, beyond just getting the addresses and then linking the data, you need the transaction history, you need the behavior history, a lot of interesting work going on about intent data, which usually looks at online behaviors, the kinds of things that people are reading, not on your website, but on other websites. And so who's going to look at cars.com? Well, maybe they're in the market for a car. That kind of a trivial example, but that's the kind of thing we're talking about here. All of which, again, helps with that sort of key goal of targeting effectively. And remember, targeting is important in digital marketing too, but it's even more important in direct mail or in modern direct mail because it's all about that targeting, as we've now said about 4 times. So first of all, let's get our data assembled. Now we have data, and note that little logo thing in the upper right, the little red one is highlighting where we are, just in case you were feeling lost. Once we have the data assembled, the next challenge is, of course, to put it in campaigns. And again, as with data, and actually as with all these other things as well, physical and digital, physical being direct mail, really have kind of different requirements. The tools that you use traditionally to build direct mail campaigns are one big list split into multiple segments, usually with something that's called a waterfall, which just think of a cascading set of a list of names getting smaller and smaller, more refined and more refined. So you fall into the first segment. If you don't fall into the first segment, we check against the second segment. If you don't fall into that, you check in the third. So you go down and down until you find the segment that you fall into. That's sort of why they call it a waterfall. And then multiple cells. And the reason you do that in direct mail is because you're then going to sometimes send the same direct mail package to each cell, sometimes send different ones, but you're going to kind of process them all together. So you have these large segmentations that take your whole audience and split it into pieces, and then decide how to treat everybody within that. Pretty standard technique, in a large campaign. Thousand cell segmentations are not unusual. Often they're much less these days, and some reasons for that. But there's a certain kind of set of capabilities that you need in your campaign management tool to produce that kind of segmentation. For digital segmentation and campaign management, kind of a different set of requirements. Okay, we're not worried about physical mail packages, so we're splitting it into cells like that so that you can get the same package to a bunch of different people that's identical except for it has a different cell code on it. So I have to have different cells in my campaign. In digital, it's all electronic. I don't physically have to break it out. I just have to mark it electronically at the individual level or possibly at the cell level. So much simpler. I can do dynamic content, so I don't, again, physically produce different versions of a mailing piece. I just electronically change it up for each person based on some rules. So a much different process, in some ways a simpler process. But the significance here is you need a tool that's going to do both. And again, personalization as well. In the digital world, it's done differently and in many ways more simply. Although now digital print is pretty easy too. We have multi-step campaign flows, so you're going to send 123 letters or 123 emails or 123 ad messages if you know who the messages are going to, so you can control the same which message a given person gets in advertising. And of course, we have multi-channel flows, so I'm going to do email, followed by direct mail, followed by a phone call with some display running along in the background, and so on and so on. I want to coordinate all that. Not easy stuff to do in a campaign manager. Not every system does that. So you have to make sure you've at least found a system that's designed to do it. And there's a number of them out there, including the one that QuickPivot sells. Channel optimization. Now, optimization is an interesting thing. How do I send the right message to the individual person? So who prefers to get direct mail versus getting email versus getting a text message versus getting a phone call? Individual level optimization based on preferences, and then campaign level optimization based on resources. I only have X number of calling hours. I only have enough budget for X number of direct mail pieces. How do I make sure that I use that money in each channel most effectively? So there's some pretty complex optimization challenges that go into planning your campaigns. And again, you need a system, or ideally you have a campaign manager that is capable of doing that sort of thing, and let me be clear that not all of them are. Optimization is much harder to find than just multi-step and even multi-channel flows. Third thing here now are down to the delivery part. And again, the point here is multi-channel delivery. We just talked about that. So again, different requirements. Obviously, in this case, self-evident. Physical delivery is different from digital delivery. For physical, we worry about things like getting output that's ready to go to the printer. It's personalized, and it can be transferred seamlessly to my execution partner, to my mail house, my printer, whoever's going to do the work. You want that to happen really easily, and the more personalized things are, the trickier that is, or at least the more carefully you have to make sure you get a solution that does it properly, because this is not just anymore, sending a copy of the mailing piece to be duplicated. This is all going to have all kinds of personalization and versioning embedded in the output. Digital, that personalization, that versioning actually a lot easier. But you have to worry about things displaying across devices. Is it going to show up equally well on the desktop, on the tablet, on the mobile phone? And there's a lot of skill that goes into making that happen properly. Also, you have the opportunity in digital to update your content automatically. So when you open the email, the message actually can change from time to time depending on the logic that's sitting behind it. Basically, the email kind of phones home and asks the central server, hey, what message should I show this guy? Here's where he is. Here's the device he's on. Here's what he's seen already. Obviously not something you can do with direct mail that some digital channels give you that capability for. So different set of things to look at. In both cases, quick response is important. Now, quick response in direct mail terms might be getting it out overnight. Quick response in digital terms is measured in milliseconds. So same concept, that I want to react as quickly as I possibly to opportunities. There's certainly very different execution issues involved in digital versus direct mail versus physical, but both important. Finally, we come to the response analysis. All right, how do we get the answers back here? Yet again, we see different requirements and different approaches depending on whether I'm doing physical or digital. In the physical world, in the direct mail world, usually you're going to put some sort of a code, physically printed a code. That's why you had all those cells in your original segmentation, because each got a different code. So I could say, the guys who bought 4 times in the last 6 months are code A, and the guys who bought 3 times in the last 12 months are code B. And now when they come back, I want to look at that code and figure it out, because I may or may not be able to actually get an actual name on it to match against, or maybe a lot more work to get the name on it. Or in some cases, you don't even necessarily know what the name is in some physical channels. But usually you want that response code, you want to capture it and then match it back to whatever your plan was so you know what segment this guy fell into. Nowadays, we also a lot of the responses are not physical. It's not a postcard coming back in. I can't remember the last time anybody sent back a postcard. It's more likely they're going to go online. But still, you want to give them some sort of a unique identifier, the equivalent of a code, or sometimes even a personalized code that is identifying the individual. But still get that from the physical back into the digital realm through that digital capture. In the digital world, of course, a whole different thing. We're tracking clicks. We're looking at cookies. We're looking at device IDs. Lots of ways to capture the response and associate it back to the promotion. That's what we're doing here. It's not just a matter of capturing the data. It's a matter of capturing the fact that it's a response and what it's a response to, so that we can make the correlation and see, oh, this promotion worked better than that promotion. And we get into the cross-channel world, of course, where, again, we want to match, oh, this was a direct mail piece that came out, but the guy came to the website. Is it the same person? How do I know it's the same person? How do I look at results across multiple channels, which begins to get down to that attribution area as well. So we have multiple measures, multiple contacts, multiple steps in a campaign that go out, multiple touches to the customer. Now, I want to know who got which touches, and not only which ones did they respond to as the particular sort of the last thing the last touch, or they responded to the email, but they also got 4 catalogs before that, and we want to give them some credit too. So there's a whole set of issues around attribution and analytics, and it's one of those things that there's many ways to do wrong and a few ways to do right. Unfortunately, most people do it wrong, and it's almost better not to do it than it is to do it wrong, because you make a lot of really bad decisions if you look at things like just what's the last touch, for example, or the first touch. So a bunch of issues with response analysis. Again, you really need to make sure that whatever systems you are working with are good at handling response analysis, the way those systems and those channels need to work. So those are sort of the 4 critical areas of things to look for to find a system that's going to do direct mail or physical and digital. And again, you're almost always going to do both. Nobody's saying let's just do direct mail. But you want a system, but it's easy, relatively easy, to find a system that can do digital these days. They kind of all do. Finding a system that will do direct mail well and will combine the digital with the direct mail, that's really the challenge. So we're talking about teaching old dogs new tricks here, in case you were wondering about that somewhat bizarre graphic. Direct mail, okay, it's an old dog, but I'm in favor of old dogs. I'm an old dog. And it does have some really great new tricks in terms of personalization and targeting and integration with digital. So let's not just toss it aside. Let's look at it. Let's use it at what it's good for. Let's not use it at what it's not good for. To use those new tricks, you're going to need some right systems, and we talked a little about the kinds of systems that you're going to need or the capabilities that you're going to need. But it's worth it. It's worth the effort. Direct mail really does work. It gives you capabilities that you don't get in any other media. There's that physical presence. There's that depth of information being transmitted. There's the sampling capabilities. There are all these things that you can really only do with direct mail. And above all, you can break through that clutter in a way that really no digital medium can do. And that's why direct mail is worth the effort. So I think now Paul is going to say a few things to you, so I'll turn it over to you, Paul.
Thanks so much for that, David. That was a great piece and a bunch of useful information. I'll try to keep the commercial brief, but I did want to say a couple words about Quick Pivot. So Quick Pivot is a software and a services company with a pretty stubborn focus on 3 things. 1, we want to build great software. 2, we want to untangle some of the complexity around customer data. And 3, we want to create great customer experiences with the brands that we work with. And to us, great software means, fast, powerful, affordable, easy to use, but really important is not watered down, because we want forward-thinking marketers to act on their vision rather than compromise it because they lack the tools. But as David suggested, any software application, ours included, it's only as good as the data that you feed it, which is why we're also so focused and investing so heavily in data management tools and know-how. And to quick pivot, it doesn't matter whether your data is centralized or scattered, clean or dirty, big or small, customer keyed or completely anonymous. Our goal is to help you create a complete view of the customer. And again, as David suggested, great software and great data does still not make great customer experiences. So our entire tagline, Marketing at Customer Speed, it's intended to convey a commitment to working through the full customer experience as it unfolds in real time across a bunch of channels, and that means journey mapping and applying agile marketing strategies and techniques to identify those little micro moments of success that you can capitalize on and move a customer on their journey closer towards that first purchase, that second purchase, and then ultimately loyalty. So the end game for us is through a combination of software, data, and services. You help our clients get, keep, and grow more customer relationships. And again, I think the whole purpose of this piece, David, in some great work, was to point out that an old channel is not dead. It's still very much part of the mix. It's got to be brought into the fold because there's a lot of it happening. So how do you do that? So I think now I'm kicking things back over to our moderator, Alyssa. And Alyssa, I believe we're going to open it up, or you're going to help moderate some Q&A for us.
Hello. Yeah, so much, Paul. Really interesting stuff from everybody today. We are going to move into the questions part of the webinar. We have a bunch of great questions, so please stick around if you can. If you do need to jump off, remember the folder widget at the bottom of the screen is available for you to grab some of the great resources from today's presentation. Be sure to share them with friends and colleagues who might find them interesting. And now let's take some questions from the audience and dig a little bit deeper. David, can you give us a list or an idea of the best practices for integrating or coordinating print and online marketing?
Yeah, sure. It's again, nowadays, you almost always do need to do the integration. There are very few situations where you're going to do direct mail by itself, and maybe sometimes you do digital by itself. But certainly with direct mail, everything has to be integrated. So, one of the things that you can do is you can put a personalized URL or a URL on your mailing address, and a personal URL is just what it sounds like. It's a URL that has an identifier embedded in it that says this is who it came from. So it's like giving everybody a different phone number to call. So depending on which phone number they call, you know who it is who's making the call. And so that gives you a way, you as the marketer, a way to identify who the person is, which means you can then send them to a different landing page or do some sort of different treatment based on who they are, what segment they fall into, or what their personal situation is. So pearls are really straightforward, easy to do, very common capability. You can put a QR code, which a little less often used, because a lot of people don't have the right apps for them, but also is sort of just a way of capturing a kind of a complex bit of data, something somebody doesn't want to type in. Or indeed, you can just give them a web address to type, but have a different, number of different web addresses for, say, different segments or different catalogs or different whatevers, so that you're going to, at least to some extent, give different treatments to people. In all cases, the different landing page for different segment, very, very easy to build. And of course, one of the nice, sort of side advantages of all that is now we know, because we know that the only reason they use that PURL or that other catalog URL or that QR code is because they're responding to our direct mail piece, so we get some more direct evidence of what the actual response was to that campaign. Paul, do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, those are great recommendations, all ones that I would have said. There's one other maybe bit of sort of tactical advice that I would suggest, which is when you're building your direct mail plan, obviously, as David said, there's a list that's output that is sent to the direct mail house, but again, usually the first step in a catalog plan or a mail plan is you're going to follow up with those individuals in other channels, and to the extent that you have email addresses for some of your physical mailing address, one, you want to make sure that you keep that file one file, meaning that even though you might not use email address in the catalog mail file output, make sure that you append email address as a column on that file, and then that means your email marketing team can actually use the very same direct mail file rather than have to recreate something, which always introduces, problems of risk and error and maybe sort of a gap in follow-up.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Excellent. So I think this next question will be good for both of you, actually. Everyone talks about improving the customer experience and managing the customer journey, but not a lot of people seem to be doing it or doing it well. What's a good first step to take? Where do you even start? Big question.
Yeah, I'm sort of like, I guess that's true. But everybody talks about a lot of things, right? Certainly the customer journey is right up there among the popular topics. And, there's some debate about whether the notion of a journey is kind of sort of suggesting things that are a little more organized and sequential than the real world. I think of it more as hopscotch, frankly. But in any event, what you want to do is you want to start with at least documenting the touch points. Where are the different places that you interact with your customers, and how do they interact with you? And then once you kind of know what those different places are, you can begin to think about some typical journeys, because there's not just one journey. So, okay, a customer who kind of follows this path, they're a new person, they're a first-time buyer, this is sort of the sequence of touches that they're going to have. And then that gives you something kind of concrete. So you can say, okay, this is the sequence that this set of people go through. And now let me begin to see where it might be useful to have data being shared across. So the guy comes to my website, and then he sends me an email. Well, maybe it'd be nice in response to the email to reference some of the stuff that he looked at on the website. So now I want to share the data between those two. Or, of course, he got a catalog, and it would be nice to know what offers there were in that catalog, so we can send him a message that is consistent or responding to that. All right? Then the other nice thing about that touch point map, and touch point map and a journey map aren't the same thing. The touch point map then lets you look at, okay, for these particular touches, what's the actual experience and what can I do to improve that experience? So that then begins, it's not just a matter of data, but the messages, and I can also begin to look at sort of the results that I'm achieving at those touches, and what usually the conversion rate to the next step, whatever that next step wants to be. So that kind of a framework, that sort of a customer touch point framework, is a really good place to start, actually pretty easy to put together, and then you can add it and make it more elaborate and add more information to it, and over time just develop a much more complete view of that customer experience, and then the customer journey is really, just think of it as slices through the different varieties of experience.
And Paul, any thoughts from the quick pivot perspective?
Yeah, so again, I would agree, right? The touchpoint map is something that you can do, with a little bit of help, maybe even on your own, without really spending any significant amount of money, and it does give you a really sort of interesting picture of where those customer touchpoint interactions are going well and not going well. And then I would say you can take it even one level deeper, right? Like once you've completed the touchpoint map, you can start to pick some battles and try and figure out what the metrics would look like to move the customer along on that that purchase path or on that journey, and start to get into those micro moments that happen that lead to conversion. So for example, say that you sell a product that someone can download a free trial of online, right? So in your touchpoint map, you would obviously have web as a channel and the download free trial page as a page. Well, a micro moment would be all of the people who hit that page, register but don't actually download the free trial. And if you drill deeper into that, the metrics need to be things like, if I can get you to that page but you didn't actually download the free trial, can I get you to download the free trial? And that's obviously a big micro moment win. But the other micro moment wins are, if you only spent 20 seconds on that page, can I get you to spend 30? If you didn't click on any links on that page, can I embed some content that gets you to redirect to another piece of content that is interesting, that helps you make the purchase decision? And again, you can sort of go crazy doing this, but if you think of every single touch point as a place where a micro moment can happen, you start to break up, the entire customer journey into those slices that David was talking about, and you can pick your battles. And again, be a little bit more agile as a marketing organization and go fight some battles one touch point at a time, trying to claw forward on some metrics.
Excellent. I think we have time for one more question here today, and this kind of builds off of what we were just talking about. Attribution is always a hot topic when it comes to print because catalogs are expensive and the ROI on them needs justification. But we continue to struggle with building an attribution model as more channels come into play. Any recommendations here?
Yeah, and I touched on attribution a little during the presentation, and it's a tough thing, attribution. There's no two ways about it. First of all, you have to have the data, and there's a lot of data. So, before you even really begin to think about attribution, you really have to pull together that customer view, or at least as much of it, as you can get done. And you don't need it. A truly complete customer view, I don't even know what that would mean. And a little drone following me around with the camera 24/7 and recording it, and even that might not be the complete customer view. But you don't quite need that. But you want to at least have some sense, to the degree possible, of what messages you've sent through various channels to the person, and ideally how they've reacted. So gather as much of that as possible. And then beyond that, the first thing to do is just to realize that simple models are almost worse than useless because they give you this false sense of understanding. So last touch or last click attribution just ignores all the stuff that went before. And since almost all your ordering nowadays is done online, it really hurts print in particular because it just doesn't show up. The guy got 3 catalogs and then he went to your website. If you don't think those 3 catalogs had some influence on the fact that he went to your website, you're really just being kind of unrealistic. But how much influence is the trick? And there are some sort of simplistic approaches. Let's give the catalogs, 10%. Just pick a number out of the air, or whatever. And then there are much more advanced statistical techniques that are non-trivial. Honestly, it's something that really takes specialists to do it right, and even the specialists don't agree. But honestly, get the data together, and then there are some methodologies looking like influence versus purchase attributed, for example, and you can begin to get some sense of it. And then if you really get to the point where your biggest problem is attribution, which is a pretty far advanced place to be in the world, then you can sort of bring in some of the more specialized techniques.
Yeah, this is Paul. That's a really healthy perspective, right? So at Quick Pivot, we're focused very much on the mid-market, right? And a lot of the specialized attribution technologies, that industry has matured, but the price tag of them is still pretty high, right? It's comparable almost to the entire marketing stack for some mid-sized brands. So I agree with David. Wait to the point where you actually really have an attribution problem. But in the meantime, right, if you can get your hands on the data, which is no trivial exercise, I think it's an interesting time right now because the suite of tools that are business intelligence and data visualization, they make it so easy for you to paint a picture of what's happening with the data. And again, it's not statistics, it's not necessarily science, and as David suggested, even those professional statisticians disagree. So don't run there. But I would very much recommend taking a very sort of low cost but very powerful tool like Tableau or MicroStrategy, getting at least one licensed version of them and just trying to get, even if it's a simple heat map picture of the channels that touch a customer pre and post purchase, and then just start inject some human intelligence into the business. And again, brands tend to understand their businesses pretty well. And when you can start painting a picture of the data and customer behavior, it'll lead you to some hypotheses that you can test and hopefully get some learning from.
All right. Thank you, Paul and David. Thank you so much. Everybody, that is all the time we have for today. Thank you for the questions as well. If we did not get to your question, we will follow up with you after the event. Be sure to connect with us all online. And remember to grab and share the resources from today's event. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar discussing how direct mail is coming back to the future. Have a good one. Bye-bye.